Thank you, Alexander. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. First, welcome everyone to this PCCB webinar. My name is Yung Xiangzha. I'm the co-chair of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. Before we start, I would like to briefly inform you about our virtual meeting next week. We would like to kindly ask you to keep your microphone muted and camera turned off during the event. During the Q&A discussion, the floor will be opened, and when you are given the floor, please turn on your camera and microphone. We do have a post-event survey where you can submit further comments and feedbacks to us after the event. Please do consider filling out this survey. It will just take 1 or 2 to 3 minutes of your time, and for us it's very important and it's a useful tool for us to receive the feedbacks and further improve our work. The link of the survey will be posted in the chat now, and also again towards the end of the webinar. We will be recording this webinar, and the recording will be made available on the PCCB's webpage next week. Now, on behalf of my fellow co-chair, Roberta, Yana, and the entire PCCB, I would like to thank you very much for your interest in and the PCCB's work and for attending today's event. In the next hour, we will focus on the census report of the PCCB prepared as the input to the first Global Stocktake of the implementation of the Paris Agreement to be held this year. We will start with a short introduction provided by my colleague Roberta on the mandate of the report and how the PCCB went about preparing it. This introduction will be followed by a presentation on the methodology issues related to preparing the synthesis report and on the report findings, which will be providing by Moritz Wieger. Moritz prepared the report as a consent under the guidance of our committee and in close consultation with the PCCB support team within the UNFCCC Secretariat. Following this presentation, there will be plenty time for your comments and questions during the Q&A session. Now I hand over to Roberta for the introduction. Roberta, please.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone also from my side. My name is Roberta Ianna, I'm from Italy, and I'm co-chairing the PCCB together with Yung Xiang. And like several other constituted bodies, the PCCB prepared its synthesis report to the Global Stocktake in response to an invitation of the CMA, which is the UNFCCC governing body for the Paris Agreement. Our synthesis report was published recently, and you can find the link to it in the next slide and in the meeting chat. Now let me give you a short background on the mandate behind this report. As per Article 14, Paragraph 1 of the Paris Agreement, the CMA shall periodically take stock of the implementation of the Paris Agreement to assess the collective progress toward achieving the purpose of the agreement and its long-term goals in a comprehensive and facilitative manner, including as regards means of implementation under which capacity building falls. As part of the information collection and preparation component of the Global Stocktake, or in short, the GST, the CMA invited relevant constituted bodies and forums and other institutional arrangements under or serving the Paris Agreement and or the Convention, including the PCCB, to prepare within its area of expertise and with the assistance of the Secretariat a synthesis report on the information identified in Decision 19/CMA1, paragraph 36, to serve as an input to the technical assessment component of the Global Stocktake. The GST also, the CMA also mandated the organization of a webinar to explain the methodological issues and assumptions behind the synthesis report, and therefore the PCCB included the synthesis report and today's webinar in its work plan for the period 2021 to 2024. This work falls under our priority area A, which focuses on enhancing coherence and coordination on capacity building under the Convention and the Paris Agreement. More specifically, the report and webinar fall under activity A.3.2 of our work plan, which covers input by the PCCB to other UNFCCC bodies and processes upon invitation or request. And then in the next slide, we did prepare this report at the PCCB. So at our fifth meeting in June 2021, we had a dedicated agenda item on the preparation of the synthesis report. And to guide our discussion at the meeting, the Secretariat prepared a background note providing relevant information on the CMA mandate and options for the next steps in the preparation of our report. At the end of our discussion, we requested the Secretariat to prepare under our guidance an annotated outline of the synthesis report by October 15, 2021. And at the PCCB, we considered and agreed in the intersessional period on the annotated outline of the synthesis report, and also decided on the sources for the report. The report was then drafted by Moritz Weigel, who was engaged for this task by the Secretariat in the period of time between November 2021 and January 2022 under our guidance. And we considered at the PCCB the draft report and discussed it during a conference call in February. The report was then finalized in March and published in early April. You can find the link to the report at the bottom of this slide, and again also in the meeting chat. Today's webinar will serve to present this report to all interested stakeholders ahead of the GST technical assessment in June. And as all synthesis report will feed into discussion at GST dialogue at the SBs, and the PCCB looks forward to supporting this process in June within our mandate. Having provided this information on the report's mandate and preparation, I am now very pleased to give the floor to Moritz Weigel to present the methodologies and assumptions used for preparing the report, as well as the report's major findings in more detail. Moritz, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Roberta, and also thank you, Yongxiang, for the introduction. So yes, indeed, I will focus my intervention on methodological issues. So explaining a bit in more detail how the PCCB went about the preparation of this report and why it was done in that way it was done. And then also highlighting or giving an overview of its content and also the conclusions of the report. So I'll start by explaining how the scope of the report was defined, how the outline was then prepared. You can keep on the previous slide, I'm just giving an overview of the presentation. Then how we identified the information sources that form the basis for the report. And then also how we went about the review, the analysis, and the synthesis of that information, and how it was then organized in the different chapters and sections and subsections. Finally, also the report offers conclusions. So the next slide, please. So on the scope, as was just mentioned, the starting point of this report was, of course, the invitation by the CMA to the PCCB, in line with its invitation to other constituted bodies to prepare those synthesis reports as inputs to the technical assessment component of the first global stocktake. And that is very much captured in this paragraph 36 of decision 19 CMA1. And in that paragraph, there are also certain aspects that relate to capacity building. So the first step was really to look at that CMA invitation and to identify in that paragraph that is quite comprehensive and applies to all synthesis reports, which are the relevant sections and aspects of the paragraph pertaining to capacity building. Then secondly, the scope was defined through the guiding questions that the chairs of the subsidiary bodies had prepared in response to a request from the CMA to guide that process of the development of the various synthesis reports. And there again, those questions are rather broad and pertain to all the different issues. And again, here we first had a look what are actually those questions that are of most relevance when we now look at the preparation of this particular synthesis report. And then thirdly, also very importantly, the scope was defined by that goal of ensuring that this synthesis report is actually complementary to other synthesis reports that also include aspects of capacity building, so that it's not duplicating any kind of work. And of course, that it also is a report prepared by the PCCB, which is fully in line with the PCCB's mandate. The next slide, please. So from there, we then started to develop the outline of this report. Of course, it includes an introductory chapter, but then that is followed by the three main chapters, which are pretty much guided by the CMA mandate and the guiding questions of the chairs of the subsidiary bodies. So the report starts after the introduction with a chapter on the current state of and progress made in capacity building. Then secondly, barriers and challenges to capacity building. And then thirdly, good practices, experiences, and potential opportunities to enhance climate action through capacity building. And then finally, the report finishes with the conclusions. So then on the next slide, we see the different information sources. And I just want to say like a few words like how we went about this. So here, the main determining factor was really that question of how do we make this report distinct from the other two inputs on capacity building to the Global Stocktake, which are one is the synthesis report on the means of implementation, which includes a capacity building section. And the other is a synthesis report on the overall effect of and the progress made in the implementation of NDCs, which also has a capacity building sections. So what was really important is to keep this report quite distinct from those other two. And then also to keep it in line with the PCCB's mandate. So while the other two reports mainly are based on information contained in national reporting from parties, this report is really focused on various documents that the PCCB has previously prepared. So those are shown here on the slide, and I'm sure you're all familiar with them, but maybe just to briefly mention also, of course, the annual technical progress reports of the PCCB. All those documents are since the operationalization of the PCCB in 2017, up to the preparation of the report. Then secondly, the annual meetings report of the PCCB, technical papers prepared by the PCCB, various summaries on workshops and events that the PCCB organized, reports of the ICG, then also the report on the PCCB network, and various reports on the capacity building hub. So next slide, please. So then how do we structure this information that is contained in those hundreds of pages of PCCB documents under those three main chapters as we had defined them earlier. So on the first chapter, so the current state of and progress made in capacity building, that is organized in line with the PCCB's three priority areas. So in short, enhancing coherence and coordination, identifying capacity gaps and needs, and promoting awareness raising, knowledge and information sharing, and stakeholder engagement. In addition, we added a section on cross-cutting issues to highlight the PCCB's work on gender responsiveness, human rights, indigenous people's knowledge, and youth. Then the second chapter on barriers and challenges is divided into two sub-chapters. The first being based on the PCCB's work under its second priority area on identifying capacity gaps and needs. But then the second section reflecting more specifically on barriers and challenges in assessing and reporting on progress in the implementation of capacity building. And this follows very much the CMA mandate for this report. Then on the next slide, please. Finally, on the third chapter and the structure on that, so that is in line or reflects the previous work by the PCCB in this area of good practices, experiences, and specific thematic work that the PCCB has been doing in this field. So it reflects both in terms of its previous reports on good practices of capacity building, for example, on the integration of climate action into national and sectoral development plans. But then also it picks up on that important work of the recommendations that the PCCB has been preparing every year for the COP and the CMA. And those, for example, also include recommendations for enhancing the sharing of good practices, experiences, and lessons learned. So then on the next slide, just a few words on the conclusions, which also allows me to give you a bit of an overview of the main findings, perhaps. So that in those conclusions, they kind of show like the PCCB's perspective, both on the progress made, but also on the persisting challenges. And certainly there has been a lot of progress made through the various priority areas and work streams of the PCCB. And maybe just to mention some highlights regarding coherence and coordination. Here, certainly one important development is really now the moving from the more information sharing to now having various bodies and processes actually starting to coordinate their capacity building related work through the ICG, the Informal Coordination Group for Capacity Building under the Convention and the Paris Agreement. And then in terms of gaps and needs, perhaps there to highlight that the PCCB did not only make a lot of progress in identifying those, but also in offering ways to assess them through the toolkit that the PCCB developed and published for this purpose. And finally, on awareness raising, information sharing, and information and knowledge sharing and stakeholder engagement, here maybe just to highlight both the establishment, but also the successful organization of the Capacity Building Hub and the PCCB network, among many other activities. With regard to persisting challenges, in terms of supporting the implementation of capacity building under the Paris Agreement, the PCCB found that its role still continues, though, to remain rather limited in terms of implementation support. And with that, I conclude my intervention for now and hand over for the question and answer session.
Hello, sorry, audio issues. So no, thank you very much, Moritz. And now we have, thank you for that very interesting presentation and highlighting the methodological issues, but also the findings of the PCCB GST report. So now we'll have some time for question and answers. So again, as mentioned earlier, please raise your hand to request for the floor or include your question in the chat box. Please direct, if you have direct questions to Moritz or the PCCB coaches, just let us know. I still don't see questions in the chat or raise hands, but please just let us know if you want to make an intervention. I see Christopher Gordon, please.
Thank you for giving me the floor, and I'm looking at paragraph 17 of the document, and you're talking about enhanced coherence and coordination of capacity building under the convention, and examples of collaboration. And I would like you to expand a little on how this is actually going to be practically implemented and which agencies are going to deliver on this issue of collaboration, because we do need to work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christopher. We have a comment, a question from the chat from Pemi from South Africa. Do we have recommendations for the areas where capacity challenges still remain? So maybe, and there's a third question from Gerben Aurora. I wanted to ask, did you include case studies to explain the limitations in a better way? Further, how case studies has helped in enhancing capacity building? And she's from India. So there are some questions there. I think maybe some of the aspects fall beyond the scope of this report, but Moritz, you want to come in and provide your comments to these questions? Happy to repeat them if you didn't pick them up from the chat.
Yeah, Alejandro, sure. Yeah, I can try to respond to that. So with regard to that paragraph 17, so what that paragraph talks about is how the PCB has engaged with other constituted bodies that serve both the Paris Agreement and the Convention, and how through engaging with those bodies on the issue of capacity building, there has been coordination or perhaps also more coherence, because those other constituted bodies, as you're probably all aware, do have components of capacity building in their work as well. And so that kind of focus in terms of coherence and coordination here is really at that, well, if you will, at the intergovernmental UNFCCC global level, through the work of those constituted bodies at that level. Now, in some cases, the work of that constituted bodies, of course, also trickles down to the national level. But the view here was really like on how those bodies coordinate or cooperate with each other in that intergovernmental process level. So yeah, I don't know if you want to add something to that, Alejandro. You're of course much more familiar with the work of the PCCB and its engagement with other constituted bodies, but that's what I just wanted to say on that paragraph 17.
No, thanks, Moritz. Maybe just to complement what you mentioned is that there are aspects of coherence and coordination within bodies and processes under the Convention and the Paris Agreement, like those mentioned in the report, the Standing Committee on Finance, the Technology Executive Committee, and others. And yeah, that through the work of the PCCB, for example, structures like this informal coordination group, where it's a space where representatives from all these bodies meet and have an opportunity to not only share experience, but to identify concrete areas of collaboration that could maximize impact and benefit in light of the mandates of each body. I think maybe aside from that, and that's more the scope of this report, we also need to, and we have been hearing in the process about coherence and coordination of actors outside the process, particularly support providers, and how to improve that coherence and coordination on capacity building so that again, to enhance effectiveness and efficiency so that, for example, a partner is not supporting activities very similar to other partner, which could be synergized and maybe enhance effectiveness and also be made more cost effective. So that's something I would like to add to that. Yeah, on the other two questions about areas where capacity challenges still remains, again, Maurice, if you have any views, I mean, I think that's more the scope of the annual synthesis reports on the national reports from parties that we as the Secretariat prepare every year. But Maurice, if you have any views from this report on these areas where capacity challenge still remain. But of course, I would also, we also have the co-chairs of the PCCB, so it would also be great to hear their views. So happy to give the floor to Roberta Yongshan. Roberta Yongshan, anything you want to add, maybe?
Thank you. No, thank you, Alejandro. No, just yes, to complement what you were just saying about addressing this aspect of the remaining needs in the synthesis report provided by the Secretariat and in the day-to-day work of the PCCB more than in the GST report. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberta. Thank you for coming in with that. So yeah, there's this question about the remaining capacity challenges, and I think I mean, wasn't that fully covered by this report, but the PCCB does use as a reference this synthesis report that we prepare every year to inform their work and also the findings of the Durban Forum. So, and I think what maybe a bit, and that's more for the general GST report that Maurice also worked on. So, but that's a bit of a different scope from this report, but there's still capacity challenges that are very much associated now with what's called current, the emerging areas under the Paris Agreement, for example. With the advent of the Paris Agreement, there are new instruments and requirements for parties, and this is where we're hearing capacity challenges remain, for example, in accessing climate finance, in matters to transparency, and as regards implementing the enhanced transparency framework we now have from the Glasgow Climate Pact, Article 6, and that will there's a mandate to develop a broad capacity building program for that. So most of these capacity challenges are now more associated also with the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Yeah. So I think there are a couple of new questions about the toolkit, the PCCB Toolkit. I don't know if maybe again, co-chairs, if you want to address some of the questions, I can complement if you wish, but if you see the questions, Roberta Yongshan, in the chat, if not, I'm happy to read them out on the toolkit. So one is, how is the toolkit ensuring that capacity building is implementing depending on different context? What is the definition you're using for capacity building versus capacity development, for instance? So that's one. Maybe I'll start with that one, and then I'll ask the co-chairs to come in. So the toolkit, just to be clear, is a resource for practitioners, for government officials, and for implementers of capacity building in terms of examples of how the capacity building needs and gaps have been assessed in different countries and in different contexts, also thematically. So that's why we, in the toolkit, the PCCB, tried to present different types of examples on the capacity building for what. There's the issues on capacity building for transparency, for accessing finance, for integrating and mainstreaming. For example, there's on gender. So trying to present experiences, because it was very challenging when preparing the toolkit in trying to have one single or standardized methodology for identifying and assessing and therefore addressing capacity building needs and gaps. It's very context specific. But still, in those case studies that are presented in the toolkit, there are elements that we believe are very useful for carrying out exercises in other countries. In terms of definitions, there is not a focus on definitions. I know you mentioned, Aida Maria, capacity building versus capacity development. So the toolkit is not really dwelling on a specific definition. It's basically cover the aspects of individual, looking at institutional capacities, but also at individual capacities. In this case, to be able to undertake climate action. So yeah, I think Rita Michan, our colleague and friend, also has a relevant question, but she's on the toolkit, but also sort of suggesting what could be if they would be if appointing capacity building follow-up could support the work of identifying capacity needs and gaps. And Rita's from she's now in the context of the adaptation committee. But Roberta Yongshan, anything you want to add?
Yeah, Alexander, just a few comments based on your answering. Actually, it's as you already covered most of the question. I just make 2 points for the toolkit. Actually, it's, as we all know, that the capacity building is very, very cross-cutting issue, and it's very hard, as Alexander already said, it's hard to find a common methodology or common standard for this capacity building could apply globally. So we are trying at this moment is to kicking off the start to developing the toolkits to help countries to further enhance their capacity building. And having said that, it's really, actually we did have a lot of difficulties to manage to develop this toolkit. So as a start, we decided to choose the cases examples to first to get this work to start, and then in future and with more support on this work, we could do better than what we are having right now. And this first thing. And second, actually, I do want to take this chance to thank for the colleagues who are helping us, especially from the PCCB network. There's a lot of colleagues are volunteer in this process, and they did a lot of work to choose the study case and to develop all this from the methodology part to develop the toolkit. So I want to stop here. Thank you, Alexander. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Yongshan, and yeah, maybe going back also to Rita's point, the PCCB in its discussions did look at that aspect of appointing focal points, and I think it actually included something related in one of its annual technical progress reports, but that, of course, is particularly in the report on 2018, but that's also, of course, as we all know, it's an issue for parties to decide in terms of having capacity building dedicated focal points. I don't know, Roberta, you want to come in?
No, I'm nothing to add on the toolkit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think Gordon, Christopher Gordon is also having additional follow-up questions in terms of how will this collaboration be seen to work at the country level. High level is great, but you need to get down to those who need the capacity building. So maybe just to highlight that the PCCB is also looking at surveys, so coherence and coordination surveys, to be something that is going to be discussed at PCCB 6, the 6th meeting of the PCCB. And I think that's also something to bear in mind when looking at this coherence and coordination surveys to focus more on those levels you mentioned. So just wanted to point that out. Yeah, the phrase transdisciplinary participatory research and tautology, that honestly, I don't know how could we answer that. Moritz, I think you wanted to come in because your microphone is open, or?
Yeah, no, I can come in on this one. I mean, on the last one, I guess, yeah, I was also thinking about this terminology. I didn't come up with it, but it has been used before in that different context on that work. And the way I understood it, or why I kept it, is that you could have participatory research in just one discipline. But what is meant here, that it's not only participatory in terms of engaging different stakeholder groups, but it's also across different disciplines of academic research or whatever research you have. So I think that's why, like, kind of where the background is, and why I also just used it like in this formulation in the report. Maybe on the other questions, in terms of the recommendations, so there is no recommendation section in that synthesis report, but there are various references to previous recommendations that the PCCB had developed to the COP and the CMA. So in that sense, there are recommendations, even if it's not a recommendation section as such. For example, in paragraph 56, you would find actually quite a number of different PCCB recommendations. On the case studies, yeah, no, there are no case studies. This is a synthesis report, so they are always trying to really synthesize large amounts of information as short as possible without losing too much content and detail, which is always a challenge. But yeah, it doesn't, in the format, it just also doesn't provide space for case studies. But then the toolkit that Alejandro mentioned, I think that's also a good place to look for case studies. I think there's some very good examples and cases from different countries around the world. Yeah, on the capacity building definition, I think you answered that already, Alejandro, right? But maybe just to also refer to the UNFCCC capacity building website, which also has a capacity building definition, and also explains a bit further on those different levels of capacity building at the individual, institutional, and systemic levels.
Thank you very much, Moritz. And yeah, coming back to the toolkit, as Moritz mentioned, there are some case studies there in the document itself, but the toolkit has a web page where you'll find the document, and then there are a lot of additional resources with additional information and case studies that you could look at. And then also, if our members from our audience have some case studies on capacity building needs and gaps that you think would be useful, please do let us know, and we can add them in the web page of the toolkit, because the intention is to be able to collect these case studies and make them available for the benefit of those practitioners on the ground. And yeah, maybe we can put the toolkit webpage also in the chat so everyone can take a look at it. Yeah, and yeah, just a comment from Premi. Thank you, Premi. Yeah, to acknowledge the importance of looking at recommendations as an input to the stock take. Thank you. I'm not seeing any further requests from the floor or chat. Let's give a couple of minutes to participants. Okay, I don't see any further requests for the floor or chat, so maybe I'll then hand it over back to the co-chairs for maybe some closing remarks or maybe comments to this discussion that you think would be useful. So back to the co-chairs.
Thank you very much, Alejandro, and let me also, on behalf of Yongxiang, thank everyone in the audience for their participation in this webinar and for the questions and comments on the synthesis report. And if you have more, please let us know. We really hope the report will be a valuable input to the technical assessment phase of the Global Stocktake that begins in June in Bonn. And we would invite you to kindly fill out the short post-event survey in order to let us know how you liked the event, the webinar, the presentation, or if you like to provide any further comments or feedback on the synthesis report. So please fill out the survey, and you can also, of course, always reach out to the Paris Committee on Capacity Building via our email account, which is managed by the PCCB support team at the Secretariat, and the email is, as you can see here in the slide, pccb@unfccc.int. And with that, if there are no further comments or raise hands, I'm closing this webinar and wish everyone a nice weekend.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.